I drove out to Oklahoma expecting silence. The kind of silence you only get on a farm, wind brushing through, corn stalks, cattle lowing in the distance, maybe the creak of an old barn door. That's what I wanted, peace. But instead of quiet, I was greeted by the metallic roar of bulldozers and the high-pitched beep of survey trucks reversing. My boots sank into fresh tire tracks cutting across the pasture. Orange stakes dotted the ground like someone had decided to play tic-tac-toe on my property. And then I saw her Linda Harris HOA president arms-crossed sunglasses glinting like she was unveiling the eighth wonder of the world. Behind her, workers were spray-painting long white lines that stretched across my cornfield. I almost laughed out loud. What's next? Linda direct, flights to Dallas, right behind my barn. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just another HOA project. This was a full-blown runway on my land. And trust me, they had no idea who they were messing with. Before we dive into this madness, drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to see how far this HOA drama reaches. When I first pulled up to the farmhouse, I honestly thought maybe I had taken a wrong turn. The mailbox still had my dad's name half faded on the side. The same tin rooster we'd nailed to the fence 20 years ago was still wobbling in the wind, and the old barn leaned just a little more to the left than I remembered. But the air felt different. Not peaceful, busy, too busy. I had come back here for one reason, rest, running the Federal Aviation Administration in Washington, D.C. Isn't exactly a 9-to-5 job. My phone rings at 2 in the morning when some private pilot forgets to file a flight plan. I've signed more emergency orders than I can count, fought with airline CEOs, testified in front of Congress. By the time summer rolled around, I figured I'd earned a week of fishing, homegrown tomatoes, and maybe even a nap or two under the oak tree out back. Instead, I pulled into a construction zone that no one had bothered to tell me about. At first, I thought maybe the county was fixing the road. Oklahoma soil has a way of cracking asphalt wide open like a broken eggshell. But when I saw orange cones inside my pasture right next to the cattle pen, my gut told me this wasn't county business. This was HOA business. And that's the worst kind of business there. Island. I parked my truck, got out, and leaned against the hood, just taking it all in. A couple of guys in neon vests were pounding stakes into the ground. Another one held a clipboard, nodding like he was the architect of the next Pentagon. They barely glanced at me, as if I was just another piece of furniture in their grand design. That's when I heard the voice I'd been dreading, Linda Harris. If arrogance had a ringtone, it would be Linda's voice. Well, look who finally decided to visit his little farm, she called out, strutting toward me like she owned the place. We've been making improvements while you were away. Improvements, I echoed. Funny because I don't remember asking for them. She smirked, pulling her sunglasses down just enough to look me dead in the eye. John, progress doesn't wait for anyone. This community is moving forward, and if you want to be stuck in the past, that's your choice. But don't get in our way. I almost asked her right then and there what in God's name they were building, but something held me back. Maybe it was the way the surveyor kept checking his tape measure. Maybe it was the fact that the stakes were spaced exactly like a runway. Straight, even aligned with the prevailing wind. My professional instincts screamed louder than her smug little speech. But I didn't let her see it. Instead, I played dumb. Progress, huh? What are we talking? A new playground, maybe a bigger pool. Linda laughed like I'd just told the world's funniest joke. You'll see soon enough. Let's just say this neighborhood is about to become a very exclusive community. She walked away before I could press her further barking orders at the workers, waving her manicured hands like she was directing an orchestra. I stood there for a while, trying to convince myself I was wrong. Maybe it was just a road. Maybe they were putting in some kind of walking trail, a bike path for the kids. But deep down, I knew better. No HOA in the history of America has ever stopped at a bike path when they could chase something bigger, louder, and more ridiculous. Later that afternoon, I wandered down to the general store in town, the kind of place where gossip travels faster than a tornado. Old man Jenkins was behind the counter, chewing his toothpick, watching me over the top of his newspaper. Back in town, huh? He said. Yeah. Thought I'd get some peace and quiet. He chuckled. Not with Linda around. That's when I knew. If Jenkins was laughing, it meant the whole town already knew something I didn't. I asked him straight, what's she building out there? He leaned back, crossed his arms, and shook his head. Rumor is, she's been talking about making this neighborhood fly-in ready. You know, like those fancy communities down in Florida where rich folks land their private planes right next to their houses. I blinked. You're telling me she's building an airstrip? I'm telling you, he said slowly, that if you want peace and quiet, you picked the wrong farm to come home to. I drove back to the property in silence, his words ringing in my ears. Fly-in community, private planes, runway. It all made a twisted kind of sense now. Linda wasn't just flexing her HOA muscles, she was trying to turn my father's land into her personal airport. When I got back, I walked the property myself. The survey lines cut straight through the pasture, past the pond ending right near the tree line. Perfect length for small aircraft. Perfect orientation for the wind. Perfectly illegal. I stood there at dusk, listening to the crickets chirp and the bulldozers growl, and I knew two things for certain. One, my vacation was officially ruined. Two, Linda Harris had just declared war on the wrong man. Because I wasn't just John Miller, farmer. I was John Miller, director of the FAA. And if she thought she could sneak a runway past me, she was about to learn the hardest lesson of her life. The next morning, I woke up earlier than I planned. Not because I wanted to, but because the sound of engines shattered the dawn before the rooster even thought about crowing. At first, I thought maybe a crop duster had gotten lost and was circling low. It wouldn't be the first time some rookie pilot forgot his bearings over Oklahoma farmland. But when I stepped onto the porch, coffee mug in hand, I froze. They weren't just surveying anymore. They were building. A long strip of my cornfield was already stripped bare. Asphalt trucks lined up like they were pouring the foundation for a Walmart parking lot. Workers in neon vests rolled giant machines back and forth, pressing the earth flat. Spray-painted lines cut across my land, bold and white, stretching from one tree line to the other. And then I saw her, Linda Harris. She was standing dead center, wearing a hard hat. She definitely didn't need barking orders like a general in a war movie. Her sunglasses glinted in the sunrise, and she had that smile, smug, satisfied, the kind of smile only HOA presidents and cartoon villains know how to pull off. I walked across the pasture toward her, boots crunching in the gravel they had already laid down. "Morning, Linda. You building me a new driveway." She didn't even look surprised to see me. "John, you should be thanking us. This is going to bring so much value to your property." Imagine the prestige neighbors landing their planes right across the street. "Planes?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "You mean to tell me you're building a runway?" "Not just a runway," she corrected, lips curling into that practiced politician's smile. "An airstrip. A private airstrip for our community. This is the future. We'll be just like those luxury neighborhoods in Florida. You'll see, it'll be beautiful." I sipped my coffee and let her words sink in. An airstrip across my cornfield. Without permission. "You do realize this is my land, right?" I said, slowly, careful not to spill my coffee as my blood pressure spiked. She waved her manicured hand like she was swatting away a fly. "Technicalities. The board already approved it. We took a vote. Majority rules." I laughed so hard I nearly choked. "A vote on my property. That's rich. What's next? You going to vote on repainting the White House?" Linda didn't laugh. She just tilted her head, smug as ever. "Progress doesn't wait, John. You'll catch up eventually." I looked past her at the crew. Asphalt was already being poured, black steam rising in the morning air. The smell of tar mixed with the sweet scent of cut corn, and I couldn't help but think how absurd it was. My father had spent 40 years raising crops here, and now Linda was trying to raise aircraft. I turned back to her. "Linda, let me spell it out for you. You can't just build a runway wherever you feel like it. There are rules, regulations, federal law." Her smile widened. "Then sue us. By the time anything goes through court, this airstrip will be finished, operational, and celebrated by the whole community. People will love it. And if you don't, well, maybe it's time you consider selling." There it was, the threat. Sell or be steamrolled. Classic HOA. I wanted to blow up right there, but I didn't. Because for all her arrogance, Linda didn't know one very important fact. She was talking to the one man in the United States who had the authority to shut her little dream down permanently. But revealing that card too soon would spoil the fun. So I smiled. "You know, Linda, I think you're right. Maybe this will be interesting." I turned on my heel and walked back to the house, leaving her blinking, maybe even a little suspicious of how calm I was. That afternoon, I walked the length of the construction zone myself. The strip was at least 3,000 feet long, already more than enough for small planes. They had leveled the ground, perfectly aligned it with the wind, like a pilot had designed it. I crouched down, touched the fresh asphalt, and shook my head. They weren't guessing. They knew what they were doing, which meant Linda had help. Someone with aviation knowledge. Someone either really stupid or really desperate. By evening, the noise hadn't stopped. Trucks moved in and out, and the pasture that used to hum with cicadas now roared like a highway. My cattle clustered in the far corner, spooked by the constant rumble. I felt the weight of my father's legacy pressing on me. He'd fought tornadoes, droughts, and bad harvests, but never in his life did he imagine a homeowners association would try to build an airport on his land. I stood on the porch with another cup of coffee, and made myself a promise. Linda, you want to play pilot? Fine. But when this crashes, and it will, you'll wish you never laid eyes on this farm. And deep down, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Because what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that every inch of this runway was already mine to destroy. Not as a farmer, not as a landowner, but as the director of the FAA. And soon enough, I was going to remind them exactly what that meant. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, I had made up my mind I wasn't going to sit quietly on the porch and watch them pave my land into their private airport. I needed to hear exactly how far they thought they could push me. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile little building with beige walls and folding chairs that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and desperation. I walked in, and instantly, every head turned. You'd think I was an outlaw walking into a saloon. Some nodded politely. Others whispered. But Linda Harris, she beamed like she'd been waiting for this showdown all week. John Miller, she announced, clapping her hands together. Glad you could finally join us. We were just discussing our community's bright new future. I took a seat in the back row, arms crossed, trying not to roll my eyes. Funny. I thought the future of my farm might include me. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. Not the friendly kind, more the awkward, let's pretend he's joking kind. Linda raised a hand for silence. John, no one is trying to exclude you, she said sweetly, though the venom was obvious. We're simply moving forward with what the majority has decided. Progress requires vision, sacrifice, and leadership. I leaned forward. Leadership is one thing. Bulldozing federal property without permission is another. That made a few people shift in their seats. Linda didn't flinch. She slid a stack of papers onto the podium like she was dealing cards in Vegas. The community voted, 73% in favor of developing the airstrip. The numbers don't lie. The numbers don't own my land, I shot back. A man in the front row, a retiree with too much cologne and not enough common sense, snorted. If you don't like it, sell and move. Someone else will appreciate the vision. Vision. That word was getting tossed around like confetti. I pictured Linda lying awake at night, dreaming of planes descending into her little kingdom, HOA bylaws fluttering like flags in the wind. The whole thing would have been hilarious if it wasn't happening on my property. I stood up, pulled the deed to the farm from my jacket, and held it high for everyone to see. This isn't just a piece of paper. This is proof that my father bought and owned this land long before any of you thought of putting up vinyl fences and neighborhood watch signs. You don't get to vote your way onto my property. Silence. For one brief, glorious moment, I thought maybe I had gotten through. Then Linda smiled, that smile, the one that makes you want to check your wallet and your sanity at the same time. John, we appreciate your sentimentality, but the world doesn't stop for nostalgia. This airstrip will benefit everyone. Higher property values, new opportunities, more prestige. You should be thanking us. I laughed sharp and bitter. Prestige. You're pouring asphalt across a cornfield. This isn't prestige, it's insanity. That broke the tension. Half the room chuckled. A few even clapped softly as if they'd been waiting for someone to say it. But Linda slammed her hand on the podium. Enough. Her voice cracked like a whip. This project is happening. And if you don't cooperate, we will fine you for every obstruction, every delay, every so-called violation you cause. The HOA has authority, Mr. Miller, and you will respect it. I stepped closer to the podium, lowering my voice, but making sure everyone could hear. Linda, let me explain something. You might be able to bully neighbors into repainting mailboxes or cutting their grass a half-inch shorter, but when it comes to airspace and runways, you're not in charge. Not even close. Her eyes narrowed. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. Is that a threat, she asked? No, I said, smiling coldly. That's a fact. The room buzzed. People leaned toward each other, whispering. Linda banged her gavel on the table like she was presiding over a courtroom. Meeting adjourned, everyone out. Chairs scraped against the floor as people shuffled out, whispering louder now. Some avoided my gaze. Others gave me the tiniest nods of encouragement, like maybe they were tired of Linda's reign but too scared to say it. I didn't move. I just stood there, staring at her, waiting. She finally looked up, her face tight. You're making a mistake, John. We're too far along. The runway will be built. The community wants it. You can't stop us. I tucked the deed back into my jacket. We'll see. Then I turned and walked out, leaving her fuming behind the podium, clutching her papers like they could somehow shield her from reality. Out in the parking lot, the summer air was thick with heat, and the faint smell of fresh asphalt drifting from my farm. I slid into my truck, sat there for a moment, and let out a long breath. They thought they had me cornered. They thought a vote and a few trucks could steamroll me into submission. What they didn't know, what Linda, in all her arrogance, couldn't begin to imagine, was that I wasn't just John Miller, the farmer's son. I was the man who signed the papers, who held the authority, who decided whether runways lived or died in this country. And she had just declared war on the director of the FAA. If I thought Linda Harris and her merry band of clipboard warriors would back off after the meeting, I was dead wrong. If anything, my defiance only fueled her obsession. Within days, the HOA turned my life at the farm into something between a construction zone and a battlefield. The first salvo came in the form of a letter, an official notice of violation tucked neatly under my front door like some kind of junk mail from hell. In bold letters, it claimed I was obstructing community progress by leaving farm equipment too close to the development site. Translation: I had parked my tractor in my own field. I crumpled the paper, tossed it straight into the trash, and muttered, "Obstruction, lady, this is called farming." But that was just the warm-up. By the next morning, the bulldozers were back, roaring louder than church bells on Sunday. They didn't even bother with courtesy hours. At 6 a.m., they were flattening ground so close to my barn that the windows rattled. Dust rose into the air like a sandstorm, coating the porch, the cattle troughs, and my morning coffee before I could even take a sip. The cattle panicked, charging to the far end of the pasture. My dog barked until he was hoarse. I stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold. That's when Linda strutted into view, heels clicking on gravel like she was walking a runway, pun intended. "Morning, John," she shouted over the din of engines. "Beautiful, isn't it? Progress in motion." I raised my cup. "You call this progress? My cows call it a nervous breakdown." She ignored me, of course. She always did. She turned to her workers and clapped her hands. "Faster, we're on schedule, schedule." The word hit me like a dart. This wasn't some half-baked idea anymore. Linda had a timeline. She was pushing hard, maybe even hoping to finish before anyone could stop her. Later that day, another letter arrived, this time threatening fines. According to the HOA, I owed them $500 for failure to comply with development guidelines. Development guidelines. On my own land. I laughed so hard, I nearly tore the paper in half. But the harassment didn't stop with letters. No, Linda turned it into theater. Every afternoon, she drove past in her shiny black SUV, slowing down just enough to roll her window down and smirk. Still resisting John, she'd call out like it was a game show. One evening, I found a brand new sign hammered into the edge of my property: "Future HOA Runway. Private use." The letters gleamed in bright blue paint as if mocking me. Beneath it, smaller text read, "Opening soon. Exclusive access." I ripped the sign out of the ground and tossed it into the back of my truck. But the image burned in my mind. Linda wasn't bluffing anymore. She was advertising. That night, I sat at my father's old kitchen table, papers spread out before me. Deeds, photographs, videos of the construction, copies of the letters. The farmhouse smelled faintly of coffee and frustration. I could almost hear my father's voice saying, "Don't let them push you, son. Miller land is Miller land." But I wasn't just a Miller. I was also director of the FAA. And Linda was practically writing me a handbook on how to bury her project. Still, I didn't reveal my secret. Not yet. Because there's something deeply satisfying about letting an enemy dig their own grave while they laugh at you. Days blurred into a routine of harassment. More letters, more noise. One morning I woke to find bright orange cones lined up across my driveway, blocking me from leaving. HOA safety measures, according to another notice. I moved them aside with my truck bumper one by one, leaving a trail of crushed plastic behind me. The looks on the workers' faces as I drove past worth it. Neighbors started whispering too. Some were furious. Dust was coating their cars. The noise shook their windows. Others were enchanted by Linda's dream, fantasizing about sipping cocktails while private jets landed across the pasture. But one thing was clear: I was now the villain in Linda's fairy tale. She even said it to my face one afternoon. "You're standing in the way of history, John," she snapped, blocking my path with her clipboard like it was a sword. "People will remember you as the stubborn old man who tried to kill progress." I leaned in, smiling, just enough to make her uneasy. "Or maybe they'll remember you as the woman who tried to build a runway on the wrong man's land." She flinched just for a second, then recovered. "You'll regret this." I let out a chuckle. "Linda, you have no idea how much fun I'm having already." That night, as the bulldozers roared and the dust rolled in through my windows, I stood outside staring at the half-built strip of asphalt cutting across my pasture. To anyone else, it looked like progress. To me, it looked like a trap, and Linda Harris was sprinting straight into it. I whispered into the hot Oklahoma night, "Keep digging, Linda. You're almost there." Because soon the real storm was coming, and it wouldn't be dust and noise. It would be the full weight of federal law crashing down on her little empire. By the end of that week, I was running on black coffee and pure spite. Sleep had become a luxury. Between the bulldozers rattling the windows, the letters piling up under my door, and Linda's smug face popping up like a bad advertisement every morning, I was one step away from snapping. And yet, I didn't snap. Because I had something Linda didn't, the ace in the deck. See, most people in this neighborhood thought I was just some middle-aged guy with dirt under his nails and an old truck in the driveway. The farmer's son who came back to play cowboy whenever Washington got too stressful. And honestly, I liked it that way. Being underestimated is a gift. But the truth was, every time Linda wagged her finger in my face, every time she handed me another bogus fine, every time she bragged about her airstrip, I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Because I wasn't just John Miller Farmer. I was John Miller, Director of the Federal Aviation Administration. That's right, the guy who signs off on every single runway in this country. From the busiest international airports to the tiniest rural landing strips, nothing takes off without my say-so. And Linda was out here pouring asphalt like she was building a backyard patio. I remember the moment I finally let myself think it out loud. I was sitting on the porch with my dog curled at my feet, the sun setting in streaks of orange over the pasture. The half-built strip of asphalt cut across the field like a scar, ugly and black against the golden corn. I sipped my coffee and muttered, "You picked the wrong farm, Linda. You didn't just trespass on my land, you trespassed into my jurisdiction." The dog tilted his head like he understood. Maybe he did. That night, I pulled out my laptop and logged into my FAA account. My inbox was full of the usual chaos, delays, permit requests, noise, complaints, but one email stood out, a formal inquiry from some unknown developer requesting expedited approval for a private runway project in Oklahoma. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled coffee on the keyboard. Linda had actually tried to go through official channels, except she didn't know the approval request landed right on my desk. Her application was a mess. No environmental study, no safety assessment, no community consultation, nothing. Just a half-baked proposal and some typed-out nonsense about increasing neighborhood prestige. I clicked the big red button marked Denied with more satisfaction than I'd felt in years. Still, I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Because watching Linda swagger around with her little clipboard army while I held her fate in my hands, that was better than sleep. The next day, she cornered me again near the barn. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said, lips pursed tight. "If you cooperate, I might even name a hangar after you." "Imagine it the John Miller Terminal," I grinned. "Sounds like a place where dreams go to die." She frowned. "Mark my words, John, this runway is happening." I leaned close enough for her to smell the coffee on my breath. "Mark mine, Linda. Nothing takes off in this country without me knowing about it." She blinked, confused, then forced a laugh. "You think you can stop progress with paperwork?" "No," I said. "I can stop it with the law." Her smile faltered just for a second, a tiny crack in the armor. I walked away before she could recover. That evening, I started building my case. Photos of the construction, videos of the dust storms, signed statements from neighbors whose windows were rattling night and day. Every piece of evidence stacked neatly in a folder marked HOA Runway, Illegal Development. And then I called a friend in Washington, a man who owed me a favor. "Listen," I said, "I've got a rogue HOA trying to build an unapproved airstrip on private land. They're about a week from pouring the full surface. I need a cease and desist ready to go." He chuckled on the other end. "You're kidding, I wish I was." "All right, I'll draft it. Just give the word when you want it delivered." I closed the laptop, leaned back, and exhaled. For the first time since I'd arrived, I felt calm. Because now it wasn't just me versus Linda, it was Linda versus the entire federal government, and spoiler alert, the government wins that fight every single time. The next morning, I walked the edge of the construction site, camera in hand. Workers eyed me nervously, whispering behind their hard hats. Word had spread that I wasn't just some farmer. Rumors fly fast in small towns, and the whispers were getting louder. "Isn't he FAA? Doesn't he work for the government?" Linda tried to drown it out with bravado. She showed up in her SUV window down, sunglasses on. "Hope you're enjoying the show," she called. I smiled, snapping another photo. "Oh, I am. Front row seat." Inside, I was grinning ear to ear. Because little did she know the curtain was about to drop on her entire production. I looked out at the half-built strip of asphalt, the machines rumbling, the workers sweating in the Oklahoma sun, and I whispered to myself, "They think they're building a runway. But really, they're building a case file." And soon that case file was going to land on Linda's desk like a bomb. By this point, the game had shifted. Linda Harris still thought she was running the show, parading her workers around like she was building the next Dallas-Fort Worth, but I knew better. She wasn't building a runway, she was building her own downfall. All I had to do was make sure every nail, every gallon of asphalt, every ounce of dust was documented. So, I became a man with two jobs, farmer by day, investigator by night. The first step was cameras. I drove into town, bought half a dozen motion-activated trail cams from the sporting goods store, and planted them around the farm like Easter eggs. One by the cattle gate, another by the pond, a third tucked into the oak tree overlooking the half-built strip. By the end of the week, I had hours of footage: bulldozers tearing up my pasture trucks, hauling in gravel workers, hammering signs into the ground that screamed private airstrip. It was more incriminating than any confession Linda could ever give. But video wasn't enough. The FAA doesn't just deal in pictures, we deal in paperwork. So I started collecting witness statements. My neighbor, old Mrs. Thompson, was the first to sign. Her house sat less than half a mile from the strip, and she hadn't had a quiet night's sleep in weeks. My windows rattled so bad I thought a tornado was coming, she grumbled, signing her name with a shaky hand. Then there was Mark, a young father down the road. He complained about his kids waking up at 2 in the morning from the noise. I didn't move to the country to raise my kids next to an airport, he said, slapping his signature on the form like he was slapping Linda herself. By the time I was done, I had a stack of testimonies thick enough to make any lawyer smile. Meanwhile, Linda was busy rehearsing her victory lap. She held meetings on the construction site, clipboards in hand, waving her arms like she was conducting an orchestra. I overheard her one afternoon bragging to a group of investors she'd suckered into funding her dream. In 2 weeks, she declared, this will be the premier fly-in community in Oklahoma. People will be begging to buy lots. I nearly spit out my coffee. Lots. She was already trying to sell real estate based on a runway she didn't even legally own. That gave me an idea, let her keep talking. The more she bragged, the bigger the rope she wrapped around her neck. I showed up at the next community gathering with my phone recording in my shirt pocket. Sure enough, Linda didn't disappoint. She strutted onto the makeshift stage, microphone squealing, and announced, our HOA airstrip will be operational by the end of this month. Membership fees will cover maintenance, and our exclusive landing rights will make this neighborhood the envy of the state. The crowd clapped. I smiled. Every word was now evidence. But the pièce de résistance came one evening when I followed the convoy of trucks back to their staging area. Tucked behind the clubhouse, I found a pile of contracts, membership agreements Linda had been handing out, promising priority hangar space for anyone willing to cough up $10,000. She wasn't just building a runway, she was running a scam. I took photos of everything. Every page, every signature, every fake promise. By the time I was done, my case file looked less like a complaint and more like a federal indictment. Still, I knew timing was everything. If I shut her down too soon, she'd cry, foul, spin it as government overreach, maybe even rally sympathy. No, I needed her to go big to plan her grand reveal. That way, when I pulled the rug out from under her, the crash would echo all the way to Washington. So I waited, and the opportunity came faster than I expected. One morning, a glossy flyer appeared in every mailbox in the community. Big bold letters, grand opening, HOA private runway, ribbon-cutting ceremony, champagne reception, live demonstration flight. The audacity nearly knocked me over. Linda wasn't hiding anymore. She was inviting the whole town to watch her crown herself Queen of the Skies. I laughed until my sides hurt. Then I stapled the flyer to my case file and made one last phone call. Yeah, I told my contact in Washington. She's hosting an opening. Get the paperwork ready. I'll need the cease and desist order in my hand by next week. He chuckled. You're actually going to let her throw a party before you shut it down? Oh, absolutely, I said. The bigger the stage, the harder the fall. That week I doubled down on preparations. Cameras checked. Witness statements organized. Photos labeled. Even the cattle seemed to sense something was coming. They clustered near the fence, watching the half-built runway like it was some alien invasion. At night I sat on the porch, the Oklahoma heat still clinging to the air, and thought about my father. He used to tell me, son, when someone's digging themselves a hole, don't take away the shovel. Linda wasn't just digging a hole, she was paving it, painting lines on it, and selling tickets to watch it happen. And soon the whole town was going to see what happens when arrogance tries to take flight without clearance. The morning of the grand opening dawned hot and sticky, the kind of Oklahoma heat that melts asphalt and tempers alike. I stood on the porch with my coffee, watching a parade of SUVs snake their way toward the half-finished airstrip. Banners fluttered in the wind, strung between hastily erected poles. Welcome to the future. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were celebrating a future that was about to be canceled before it even took off. I dressed plain jeans, boots, a faded ball cap. I wanted to look like what Linda thought I was, just another cranky farmer. I tucked my FAA badge into my jacket pocket, feeling its weight like a secret weapon. By the time I reached the site, it looked less like a construction zone and more like a county fair. Folding chairs lined up in neat rows. A red ribbon stretched across the blackened strip of asphalt. There was even a table of champagne flutes sweating in the heat, as if bubbles could distract from the stench of tar. Neighbors milled around, some genuinely excited, others whispering behind their hands. Investors in suits fanned themselves with the glossy brochures. Linda had printed brochures that promised exclusive air access, premium hangar space, and sky-high property values. And then there was Linda. She strutted across the stage in a crisp white blazer, microphone in hand, her sunglasses reflecting the crowd like a pair of mirrored shields. Behind her, a banner read HOA Private Runway, Opening Day. She tapped the mic, cleared her throat, and let that voice of hers, half charm, half command, spill out across the pasture. Ladies and gentlemen, today marks a new chapter in our community's history. No longer are we just another neighborhood in Oklahoma. No, we are pioneers, visionaries, leaders in progress. The crowd applauded, some half-hearted, some a little too enthusiastic. Linda continued, her voice swelling with each phrase. This runway will put us on the map. Imagine the convenience, our friends, our families, our business partners flying in directly, bypassing crowded airports. Imagine the prestige of living in a fly-in community. Today we join the ranks of the elite. I almost choked on my laughter. Elite. She had bulldozed my cornfield and poured half-baked asphalt, and she thought she was building LaGuardia. Linda raised her champagne flute. To progress, to vision, to the future of our neighborhood. Glasses clinked, cameras flashed. Investors smiled like they'd just bought beachfront property in Arizona. But the grand finale was yet to come. With a dramatic flourish, Linda gestured to the sky. And now, to christen our new runway, we welcome our first demonstration flight. Heads turned upward. Sure enough, a small twin-engine plane circled above, dipping its wings in salute. The crowd oohed and ahead as it lined up with the strip. Linda spread her arms wide, soaking in the applause. History is landing here today. That was my cue. I stepped forward from the crowd, the hot sun beating down on the brim of my cap. My boots crunched on the gravel as I made my way toward the stage. At first, no one noticed. Then whispers spread, neighbors nudging each other, investors frowning. By the time I reached the ribbon, all eyes were on me. Linda, I called out, my voice steady. You might want to hold off on the champagne. She blinked, thrown off for the first time all day. John, this isn't the time. Actually, I interrupted, pulling the badge from my pocket, holding it high for everyone to see. This is the perfect time. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Camera zoomed in. The FAA emblem gleamed in the sunlight. My name is John Miller, I said loud enough for the circling plane to hear, and I am the director of the Federal Aviation Administration. And as of this moment, this runway is officially shut down. For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy in the air. Then chaos erupted. Investors started murmuring angrily, flipping through their glossy brochures as if the fine print might save them. Neighbors gasped, some whispering. I knew it. Others stared at Linda like she had just sold them swampland. Linda's face turned the color of the asphalt beneath her feet. You can't do this, she stammered, her microphone squealing. I smiled, calm as a Sunday preacher. Linda, I'm literally the only person who can. The plane above dipped lower, lining up with the strip. I raised my hand, gestured to the sheriff's deputies I'd briefed earlier. They waved their signals, radios crackling. The pilot banked hard, engines roaring as the plane veered off and climbed back into the sky. The crowd gasped again, some covering their ears, others shielding their eyes from the sudden blast of wind. The sound of that aborted landing was sweeter than any symphony. Linda dropped her microphone, scrambling to save face. This is a misunderstanding. We have approvals. We have investors. This is progress. I stepped closer, voice steady, almost kind. No, Linda. This is illegal construction, federal violation, and fraud. And it ends today. The deputies moved in, confiscating paperwork, snapping photos of the site. The cameramen from the local news captured every second Linda's trembling hands. The ripped ribbon, the abandoned champagne glasses sweating in the sunday. Neighbors started clapping. First a few, then a dozen, then the whole crowd. The sound swelled, a wave of applause rolling over the site like thunder. I stood there, badge in hand, watching Linda's empire collapse in front of her investors, her neighbors, her own workers. And I couldn't help but think this was better than coffee. Once the applause died down, the chaos began. Investors stormed toward Linda Harris, waving contracts in her face. Cameras from the local news crew swarmed the stage, shoving microphones toward her mouth. Her carefully rehearsed speech about vision and progress was now drowned out by questions like, "Did you know this project was illegal, and how much money did you collect from residents?" Linda's composure cracked. She yanked off her sunglasses, her eyes darting like a cornered animal. "This is all a misunderstanding," she stammered. "We followed the process. We filed the paperwork." I stepped up beside her, holding my FAA badge where the cameras could see it. "Correction," I said smoothly. "You attempted to file paperwork, and it was denied. By me." Gasps rippled through the crowd again. Neighbors who had been skeptical now looked at me with wide eyes, whispers hissing like static. "He's FAA director. Wait, he's the guy in charge." Linda froze, the color draining from her face. For the first time in weeks, she was speechless. "Ladies and gentlemen," I continued, turning to address the crowd, "this so-called runway violates federal aviation regulations, environmental standards, and basic property rights. It is unsafe, unauthorized, and absolutely illegal. And as of today, it is officially shut down." The deputies I'd called in earlier stepped forward, handing me the cease and desist order stamped with the FAA seal. I unfolded it slowly, deliberately letting the cameras capture every word. Then I handed a copy to Linda. She snatched it with trembling hands, scanning the first line. Her lips moved silently as she read, "Effective immediately. All construction and operation of unauthorized runway activities are prohibited. Violations will result in fines, demolition orders, and potential criminal charges." The paper slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the ground like a white flag. The crowd erupted again. Some cheered, some booed. But one thing was certain: Linda's dream of glory had just crash-landed in front of everyone. "John, please," she whispered, suddenly soft, suddenly human. "We can work something out. We can negotiate. This community needs this project." I cut her off with a smirk. "Linda, the only thing this community needs is peace and quiet. And maybe a good night's sleep without bulldozers rattling their windows." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Even the deputies cracked smiles. But I wasn't finished. Oh no, this was the part where the hammer truly fell. I turned back to the investors. "For those of you who were misled, the FAA will be opening a formal investigation into fraudulent claims made by the HOA board. Any contracts you signed promising hangar space or runway access are null and void. You may wish to consult your attorneys." The investors' faces darkened, their anger now fully redirected at Linda. One man in a suit jabbed a finger at her chest. "You told us this was approved." Linda backed away, hands up. I thought it was. He's exaggerating. Exaggerating." I raised an eyebrow. "Linda, you've been selling memberships for a runway that doesn't legally exist. That's not exaggeration. That's fraud." The sheriff cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Ma'am, we'll need you to come down to the station for questioning." The gasp that went through the crowd this time wasn't shock, it was satisfaction. Years of pent-up resentment toward Linda Harris were now bubbling to the surface. One woman shouted, "About time." Another man called out, "Check her books. She's been pocketing our HOA fees for years." Linda spun desperate. "No, you don't understand. This was for all of us." For progress, I shook my head. "No, Linda. This was for you, your ego, your pride. And now it's over." The deputies escorted her toward the SUV she'd driven in. She resisted, sputtering excuses, but the cameras caught every second. By tomorrow morning, her face would be plastered across every local news channel, maybe even national headlines. As the dust settled, I addressed the crowd one last time. "Neighbors, I know the past few weeks have been loud, frustrating, even frightening. But I promise you this, the runway is finished, not in the way Linda dreamed, but in the way the law demands. The FAA exists to keep our skies safe. And that includes stopping reckless projects like this before they can hurt anyone." The applause was real this time. Loud, sustained. A wave of relief rolled over the crowd. People clapped me on the back, thanked me, shook my hand. Even the kids, still covering their ears from the aborted plane flyover, smiled like they knew a villain had just been vanquished. I bent down, picked up the champagne flute Linda had abandoned on the stage, and held it high. "To peace and quiet," I said. The crowd laughed and cheered again. And for the first time since I'd returned to the farm, I felt the tension lift. The runway was dead. The scam was exposed. And Linda Harris, queen of the HOA, had just been dethroned in spectacular fashion. But deep down I knew this wasn't quite the end. There were still lawsuits to be filed, fines to be collected, and damage to repair. Still, as I walked back across the pasture, the setting sun painting the sky in gold, I allowed myself a small smile, because today justice had landed exactly where it belonged. And Linda, she had just taken the roughest landing of her life. The days following the so-called grand opening felt like a storm clearing after weeks of choking dust. For the first time in months, the air over my father's farm was quiet again. No bulldozers rattling the earth. No survey crews staking flags like they were conquering territory. Just wind through the corn cattle grazing in peace and the cicadas starting up their nightly chorus. It felt like the land was breathing again. But for Linda Harris, the storm was only just beginning. The very next morning, the local news aired footage of her meltdown on live TV. The headline was brutal: HOA president exposed in illegal runway scheme. The clip of me holding up my FAA badge replayed on a loop right alongside Linda stammering, "This is a misunderstanding." By noon, the video had gone viral on social media. Memes popped up with captions like "Runway," more like "Runaway." Neighbors who once feared Linda now found their voices. At the emergency HOA meeting that weekend, members lined up at the microphone to air grievances she had buried for years. One accused her of pocketing landscaping fees. Another claimed she fined them for a mailbox color that wasn't even against the rules. By the end of the meeting, the board voted unanimously to remove her as president. I didn't attend. I had no desire to sit through another one of their circuses, but I heard the cheer that went up when the gavel came down. Meanwhile, the FAA investigation moved swiftly. The cease and desist order had frozen all activity, and the legal team in Washington wasted no time piling on the charges. Unauthorized construction, environmental violations, fraudulent claims. Each one came with fines that could bankrupt a small corporation, let alone a suburban HOA. Investors scrambled to salvage what they could. Some threatened lawsuits. Others simply disappeared, pretending they'd never touched Linda's pet project. But the contracts, the glossy brochures, the video of Linda bragging about exclusive air access, all of it was in my file, and all of it was now evidence. As for the runway itself, demolition crews arrived within a week. They tore up the half-laid asphalt, hauled away the debris, and filled the scar in the field with fresh soil. By the time they were done, the land looked almost normal again, except for the faint black lines still peeking through the dirt like the ghost of Linda's failed dream. I stood there one evening, hands in my pockets, watching the sunset glow over the patched earth. My father would have shaken his head, maybe laughed, maybe cursed. But I knew one thing for sure: he would have been proud that the farm had survived, just like it always had. The neighbors stopped by more often after that. Mrs. Thompson brought over a pie to thank me for the first quiet night's sleep she'd had in months. Mark from down the road offered to help mend the fence where the bulldozers had knocked it loose. Even old man Jenkins, never one for sentiment, tipped his hat and muttered, "Good work, son. About time someone clipped Linda's wings." I appreciated it, but I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because it was the right thing. Because no one, not even the most arrogant HOA president in Oklahoma, gets to bulldoze their neighbors' lives for the sake of ego. And yet I couldn't resist a little irony. Sitting on the porch with my dog at my feet, I chuckled to myself. All I wanted was a week off, I said out loud. Instead, I ended up shutting down the shortest-lived airport in America. The dog wagged his tail. Maybe he got the joke. In the weeks that followed, life settled back into a rhythm. I mended fences, replanted corn, and even managed to sneak in that nap under the oak tree I'd been dreaming about. But every time a plane passed high overhead, glinting silver in the sunlight, I thought about Linda Harris. Somewhere she was probably still fuming, still convinced she'd been robbed of her legacy. Too bad for her, the only thing that ever really took off was her arrogance, and it crash-landed faster than she could say progress. At the end of the day, this story isn't just about an HOA trying to build a runway. It's about something bigger: pride, greed, and the blindness that comes from believing rules don't apply to you. Linda Harris thought she could bulldoze her way to prestige, that she could shout down opposition, that a majority vote could override common sense. But the truth is simple. No amount of arrogance can outfly reality. Life has a way of humbling us. Sometimes it's a failed project, sometimes it's a confrontation we never expected, sometimes it's a reminder that power without responsibility always collapses. My father used to tell me Sunland remembers. It knows who respects it and who abuses it. Watching the bulldozers tear up the runway, I realized he was right. To anyone listening who's ever faced a bully, whether it's an HOA president, a boss, or even a neighbor, remember this: you don't have to shout the loudest to win. Sometimes patience, preparation, and truth are the sharpest weapons you can carry. So tell me in the comments, have you ever dealt with someone like Linda Harris? How did you handle it? And if you enjoyed this story, hit that subscribe button, because trust me, there are plenty more HOA dramas waiting to take flight.